Welcome back to today's explainer. So get ready because we're about to take a really fascinating and honestly a slightly uncomfortable psychological journey together. Today, we're essentially scraping away the thick protective layers of the human psyche that the legendary psychologist Carl Jung mapped out for us. We're going to explore exactly why we constantly romanticize the people in our lives, why doing so ultimately ends up hurting us, and how we can finally wake up to the reality of human nature.
Okay, let's just dive right into this. There's this incredibly powerful story about Carl Jung and a woman who came to his practice completely shattered by a betrayal. She kept saying over and over that she just didn't understand how someone could do this to her. But Jung, paying close attention, noticed something deeply disturbing. Her profound pain wasn't actually coming from the reality of the situation itself. It was coming from the total collapse of a fantasy. The version of the person she loved? It was completely invented in her own head.
And that brings us to our first really core concept today, projection. You see, our minds do something genuinely dangerous and honestly kind of delusional with people we admire or love or fear or desire. We fill in the missing parts. You meet someone who is super confident, right? And your mind automatically just assumes they're also loyal. You meet someone attractive and your brain instantly assumes they are kind. We fall head over heels for these mental projections and we completely miss the deeply flawed real person standing right in front of us.
But we all eventually face a pretty brutal contrast. We have this beautiful, flawless illusion we've painted in our minds. And then we have reality. And the thing about reality is, it doesn't usually announce itself loudly. It arrives quietly, almost like a knife. It shows up in delayed replies, in sudden, unexplained distance, or in blatant disrespect that is cleverly disguised as just a joke. It's that terrifying, sinking realization that the version of someone living inside your head is much, much warmer than the real person actually in front of you.
Now, once you see this illusion shatter, you start noticing how society really operates on a daily basis. People perform versions of themselves depending entirely on who is in the room with them. We slap on these thick, impasto layers of a social mask. The loyal friend suddenly becomes a totally different person around a different crowd. The nice person turns cruel the absolute second they gain a tiny bit of social power. People mold their personalities to gain acceptance, to survive, and ultimately to win.
To really understand why this happens, we have to look at Carl Jung's famous concept of the shadow. The shadow represents the hidden, completely unacknowledged parts of ourselves that we desperately refuse to look at. And here's the deeply unsettling part. Most people genuinely believe they are the mask they perform. But the more they avoid looking at their shadow, the more totally artificial their personality becomes.
Spend enough time with someone and you see exactly how this plays out in real time. You see the surface performance, right? The charm, the support, the affection. But eventually, the performance glitches. The mask slips, and for just a split second, you see the terrifying psychological reality hiding right beneath it. The deep insecurity underneath all that charm. The burning envy underneath the supportive words. And the desperate need for control hiding beneath their affection.
Jung pointed out something wild. He believed that what people reject in themselves gets projected directly onto others. Once you understand this, social life becomes psychologically disturbing. It's almost like a dark comedy. The most insecure people are literally the first to accuse others of seeking attention. The most dishonest people are usually the ones obsessing out loud about loyalty. And highly controlling people, they will almost always label themselves as protectors. People reveal their true selves through repetition, not through confession.
Now you've probably felt this before, haven't you? Think about that strange, heavy exhaustion you feel after socializing. That feeling where you are physically present, but psychologically completely absent. You just spent hours performing a highly sculpted, easily digestible version of yourself just to keep everyone else in the room comfortable, while the real you remained totally hidden underneath. It is deeply, fundamentally draining.
So the crucial point here is that this exhaustion bleeds right into our most intimate connections. So many relationships aren't actually built on pure love. They are built on unconscious, entirely transactional psychological contracts. People rely on mutual dependency. It's like, I will make you feel valuable if you make me feel wanted. I will save you if you never leave me. And these relationships only begin cracking when someone actually evolves, sets boundaries, and stops providing the emotional transaction the other person was relying on.
We basically unconsciously organize ourselves around roles. Maybe you're the funny friend, the strong one, the rescuer, or the listener. But the absolute moment you stop performing that specific role, say you start setting boundaries or showing your own vulnerabilities, people react as if you violated an invisible contract. And honestly, In their eyes, you literally have. Because very few people actually want complete authenticity. It disrupts their comfort zone.
Up until now, it's pretty easy to look at all this and feel a sense of cold detachment. To feel like you've finally woken up to how manipulative everyone else around you is. But seeing the darkness in others is only half the journey. As Jung warned, the real horror begins when you finally recognize that exact same darkness living deep inside yourself.
We have to peel back the heavy, uncomfortable layers of our own psyche, because we all carry a shadow. It's that moment you catch yourself secretly enjoying someone else's failure, or withholding your affection just to regain control of a situation, or pretending not to care because caring feels way too dangerous. We all harbor these impulses, and if we bury them alive and pretend they don't exist, they are absolutely going to leak out later as passive aggression or hidden resentment.
And this brings us to a really profound truth about why we constantly repeat our mistakes. Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Most of our personality is completely automated. We walk around thinking we just have bad luck with people, but unconsciously, we are actively and repeatedly choosing familiar emotional dynamics, even when those dynamics destroy us.
To truly heal, we have to let go of the moral fantasy, that childish idea that love somehow automatically makes people pure, or that just being intellectually aware of something makes you immune to darkness. The psychological reality is much more stark. Human beings are adaptable conditions. So much of what we call complex human behavior is really just primal emotional survival wearing intellectual clothing. So why do we fiercely resist this truth? Why do we keep returning to toxic relationships and manipulative friends? Because change actively threatens our very identity. If you've been a victim your whole life, healing actually feels like losing yourself. We fiercely protect our psychological structures because, strangely enough, the familiar pain of a toxic dynamic feels far more comfortable than the terrifying silence of finally facing ourselves. All of this builds into a very distinct evolution of awareness. First, you experience absolute shock at how people behave. Then, you might fall into a cynical, cold detachment. But the absolutely crucial third step is shadow confrontation, facing your own darkness. Only after you do that can you reach step 4, true clarity. A grounded, clear-eyed psychological awakening where you finally see human nature for what it really is. As you step into this clarity, you'll notice the world actually gets a lot quieter. You start to see how desperately people try to escape themselves. People use constant noise, social media, status, and endless relationships to avoid just sitting alone. Because sitting in silence forces confrontation with your own mind. And for someone who has built their entire identity on external validation, that confrontation is absolutely terrifying. In this final awakening phase, you stop dividing humanity into simplistic heroes and monsters. You let go of the moral fantasy entirely. You begin to accept that everyone, absolutely everyone, including yourself, is psychologically fragmented. We are all beautifully flawed, we are all performing, and we are all deeply afraid. You simply stop begging reality to be softer than it is. You ultimately realize something huge here. The masks other people wore, they were never the actual problem. The problem was that you believed those masks were permanent. The greatest danger you ever faced wasn't that other people were capable of deceiving you. No, the true danger was that your own deep loneliness, your desires, your hopes, and your projections could deceive you first.
And that leaves us with this final, profoundly important question to reflect on today. Look closely at the relationships in your life right now. Are you loving a real, messy, fragmented human being? Or are you just loving an illusion of your own making? The day you stop romanticizing people is the day you stop needing them to complete a fantasy in your mind. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep your eyes open.